Today I will read for you translations of poems by Ukrainian poets. Almost all of them, the originals, were published in a Russian language online magazine called, in Russian it's called Точка зрения, and in English that's Viewpoint. And it's available at litpoint.press. Lit as in literature, point.press, litpoint.press. So it is a magazine where people from Ukraine, from Russia, those who are brave enough to write poetry of witness in Russia and have it published, as well as all over the world, people who write in Russian, their poetry gets published. And most of the poets whose work I'll be reading in my translation in English today, they're actually bilingual. They write poetry both in Russian and in Ukrainian. And in fact, the first poem I will read actually has both parts in Russian and Ukrainian. Unfortunately, I only know Russian, so I translate from Russian. When there is Ukrainian that is part of the poem, or when the same poem exists in both Russian and Ukrainian versions, I consult with Ilya Lipis, who is a friend of mine and a translator who lives in Toronto, and he translates Ukrainian poetry into Russian, so he's very much attuned to both languages. So I will say a few words about my own background. I am a resident of Madison. I was born and grew up in what is now Russia, St. Petersburg. At the time it was Leningrad in Soviet Union. My family was fortunate enough to have gotten a chance to get out, and we seized that chance. It was kind of scary, but we were lucky, we really did get out. And we came to the United States in 1979 as refugees, and I am enormously grateful to fate and also to this country for accepting us. I finished high school here, and then my English wasn't particularly good, so I didn't consider any kind of literary or humanities subjects. I just went the techie route. I graduated from Princeton with electrical engineering computer science degree, PhD from Cornell in statistics, and I've been working as a techie ever since. Nonetheless, I've continued to write poetry at first only in Russian and translate from English into Russian, but the last few years I've become bilingual, I think. I have been in this space many times, as John mentioned. I'm a member of Arts by the People project, and there are workshops, there are poetry reading. I feel that I benefit very much from participating in this project. I see Simon, I see Shane, John are participants of that project as well. And I'm also a participant of another, I see Michael there, I think, in the shadow. And I'm also a participant of Red Wheelbarrow Poets workshop. They've been enormously helpful. Oh, and just on cue, one of the intrepid leaders of the Red Wheelbarrow Poets workshop just walked in. Frank, hi, Frank Rubino. Yeah. So, and it's been enormously helpful because when I translate, I pass my translations through many hands and many ears and many voices. I ask people to read them aloud, to give me feedback on them, because I want to make sure that it works as poetry in English. So, thank you very much. And I also want to acknowledge Bruce Esser, my husband, who is also my English consultant and editor, and his poems pass through his voice. I always ask him to read aloud so I can hear how does it sound in English. And now I am also a student in the MFA program, Master in Fine Arts program in creative writing at Fairleigh Dickinson University. And so I want to thank my literary translation mentors, Professor Mina Zalman-Proctor and H.L. Hicks. I'm doing a dual major in literary translation and poetry. So John asked me to say a few words about how I got into translating this poetry of witness. Until February of last year, I did do literary translation, I did do poetry translation, but I really was not, poetry of witness was not really kind of my genre. I gravitated more to lyrical poetry or children's poetry. And when that invasion, I mean, Russia has attacked Ukraine starting in 2014, but this really intense, full-scale bloodshed, destruction, and so on, that started in February of last year, I was so shocked that I was basically whatever part of me is responsible for writing or translating poetry just went catatonic. But then some weeks later, an acquaintance of mine who knows me as a translator contacted me from Canada and told me that she has a friend in Ukraine, in Kharkiv, a woman by the name of Galina Pashkova. This woman, by the way, is also a techie, Galina, turns out. But she writes song lyrics. And she wrote a song and published it on Facebook about what she was feeling, what she was going through. And this woman asked me to translate it into English because this woman wanted to share it with her English language friends to sort of convey, what it feels like at the individual level. And that's where my neurons, I think, started to sort of coalesce back into some functional order, and I translated this song lyrics. And then after that, somebody else contacted me about this LitPoint.press, and then from there, it's sort of, I got pulled in. So this particular song, written by this woman, it actually has parts in Russian and parts in Ukrainian. There are a lot, as I said, a lot of the poets who live there, they are bilingual, Russian and Ukrainian. For them were languages in which they expressed their innermost being. And I think another big miscalculation by Putin was that he assumed that people for whom Russian language, Russian culture are important, that they will basically be subject to his propaganda, that they will be meeting his invasion with open arms, and of course that's not at all what happened. And it's my suspicion that one of the reasons that cities like Kharkiv, which do have a lot of Russian language culture and dual language population, that they kind of get special cruelty in part because of that, fury that they didn't turn out to be the way expected. So I will read to you a small bit of the Russian. I am not going to attempt to read Ukrainian because unfortunately I don't know this language. So as I said, when I work with texts that have Ukrainian or parallel Ukrainian, I work with somebody who does know Ukrainian to make sure that I don't just Google translate it, that I understand all the nuances and so on. Okay, so this is part of the song lyrics. Unfortunately, I'm not a singer, despite my vocalizations. Very fancy reverberations. Желтый и синий. Души ушли в молчание с чувствами перебои. Не в проворот эмоций, но возвращаются сны. Дивный кусочек счастья синей полоской море, желтой полоской солнца, будто и нет войны. The song is called Yellow and Blue. And what I did is I translated both Russian and Ukrainian into English. There's no way for me to differentiate them in English. Our souls have fallen silent. Our senses are shaken with turmoil. Our feelings have no outlet, yet our dreams bring once more memories of our contentment. Bright blue like a sparkling surf line. Bright yellow, warm and sunlit, knowing nothing of war. Staying afloat is uncertain as the maelstrom of grief pulls us under. Still, we keep our faith that springtime will bring our world ashore. Where are you behind smoke's curtain, the blue of the sea horizon, the yellow rays of the sunrise that know nothing of war? How can we speak of forgiveness when our world has exploded, the heavenly orbits are broken, our common sky split apart? There is no more morning and evening. A wall of shadow has descended, hiding one path from another, dividing a heart from a heart. Love is locked in a struggle with the forces of hatred. We will subdue the darkness. It is up to us to restore the yellow band of sunlight with the blue band of seawater, our life of contentment and freedom that knows nothing of war. So, I don't think that the poets who wrote this saw this particular artworks, but I think that there is a kind of correspondence, and in particular, this song reminds me of this portrait behind me by Hanna Melnichuk, titled "Don't Close Your Eyes," and has the colors on that shock. And I think that this feeling of our common sky split apart, I think that, there were a lot of, and still are, a lot of intertwinings between families and colleagues and cultural institutions and so on in Russia and Ukraine. So it feels basically, I'm thinking of this Adam and Eve morning Abel. There's a picture there, and I think it feels very much like that this attack, that it's people who are closely related, their country are attacking not only their neighbor, but in some cases their relatives and so on. So it's a very shocking situation. So John asked me to talk a little bit about the process of translation, and I kind of like in thanking people who are here, who helped me translate, I sort of revealed a very large part of it. So basically, first of all, not every poem, at least in my opinion, not every poem can be translated. There's a lot of poetry, and I think maybe Russian poetry is maybe even more prone to it than English, where there are so many cultural references to other pieces of poetry, or in general to things that are completely, that the person who knows the language and the culture is completely, has in the even subconscious, certainly in conscious memory, that might not have enough equivalence. So a lot of the time that, more than like the fact, it's rhymed poetry or whatever, a lot of the time that's what, in my view, makes many poems that I love and that move me deeply untranslatable. But if a poem really catches me and I feel like, okay, it may be translatable, or sometimes I think it's not translatable, but some subconscious process knows that it is. Basically, I read it aloud many, many times. Gradually, translation starts to emerge, and then it's a matter of running it by multiple people, working on it repeatedly, and a lot of it is asking, even if it's free verse, or not even, regardless of whether it's, something like a song or free verse, or something in between, just hearing how it sounds in English. And so, thank you, Frank, thank you, Bruce, and everybody who gets involved in that. Shane. And Arthur is here. He's wearing a hat and shading his. Okay, Arthur Russell is another.
He's on the down low.
Yeah. Another co-conspirator from the Red Wheelbarrow Poets. Okay, so and occasionally I usually try to preserve the form of the poem. Sometimes I maybe don't have as dense a rhyming scheme as Russian does. Russian is much rhymier language than English. But like what you just heard, I preserve the rhythm, the meter, and the rhyme poetry. Sometimes I intentionally change something, and I always do consult with the author of the original. And sometimes I get these things that almost make me break out in tears because, like 2 or 3 days later I get email, I'm so sorry, I didn't answer your question right away. We had no electricity, but now, no, you don't need to apologize. But in some cases I do change something, and so I'm going to give you an example of a poem where I did intentionally change something. Russian language there is free verse, and I will read you some. But a lot of poetry that's written in Russian language is rhymed and has regular meter. So that may sound archaic or like childish poetry or like maybe commercials in English language, especially if it's like short lines. It sounds definitely like children's poetry or commercials. I think the reason why it sounds this way to an English ear and it sounds like serious poetry in Russian is I think that there is a kind of underneath, there is a common reason. I think that rhyme and regular meter are very mnemonic. They make it easy to memorize a poem. So for children or commercial, when you want to kind of nail this thing to the brain of your listeners, that's one set of reasons to do it. But in Russia, a lot of the time poetry was forbidden. The poets were jailed or exiled. Or they were writing their poetry and memorizing it, and like Akhmatova would burn her poetry because it was so dangerous to keep it. And so the pneumonia, and now unfortunately, once again, poets are being brutalized and persecuted and so on. And so I think that it helps pass the poetry, or it helps even the poets themselves to keep the poem in their memory. So here's a poem where it has a pretty complex rhyme scheme, which I did keep, but it has short lines, and I lengthened them because otherwise in English it sounded to me too much like children's poetry, which it is not. This is serious. So in Russian, I'll read again a small section. Ни слова о войне, побудь наедине со мной, пока еще вдвоем быть можно, пока цветет сирень, и мы в плену сирен, как пойманные птицы, осторожны. This is a poem by Inna Kvasivka. She's a poet and a journalist who lives in Odessa, and her poetry really reminds me of Ksenia Dachuk's paintings. I think it's probably watercolors there of this very ethereal young woman. Inna Kvasivka, judging from her photograph, looks like that, and I think her poetry has that sense of ethereal, very feminine presence. Not a word. Not a word about war. While we still have this hour, stay with me, be with me, without words. Outside lilacs flower, Held by air sirens' power, we're watchful, like two captive birds. While the storm does not howl, and our home still stands whole, rocket launchers hold off on their rain. Do not say that we'll live as if poured through a sieve, much will sift through, but little will remain. Do not speak, let it come, stillness vast, soft, and calm. Let it sweep away sounds without trace, as though we are long dead, as though all pain and dread have departed and granted us grace. Do not speak of the tears, how they blind, how they sear, of how icy the hands feel at parting. No, I will not break down. Meeting your silence, I silently will reply. Not a word about war, not one sound. And now I will read a few poems by Dmitry Bliznyuk. He lives in Kharkiv, Ukraine, and he writes 3 verses. A periwinkle Volkswagen next to a bombed-out school, parked there for months since the first days of the invasion, is now covered with pigeon droppings, as if the souls of the slaughtered schoolchildren begin every morning in paradise by dutifully brushing their teeth and spitting out the toothpaste on the car's hood and roof. And there's a painting there which I found the hardest to look at, because it shows a child screaming, maybe dying, or maybe already dead, and it's called Victims by Olga Zaremba, and that's what this poem reminds me. And here's another poem by Bliznyuk. It just came out, just has been published, this translation, in a magazine, New York City-based magazine called 128 Lit. It's 128lit.org, numbers 128lit.org. And the poem is called My Fish Will Stay Alive. Just for a moment, what do they feel, the catfish and the carp, when their pond is hit by a rocket? Steel shrapnel burst through the brick wall, tore apart the aquarium as if it were a paper bag of water and glass splinters. She crashed to the floor. Across her back fanned wet strands of hair interwoven with kelp. An angelfish jumped around on the linoleum next to her face, a bright comma of life, suffocating. But she was unscathed, not a scratch. Her legs just got stuck together like hard candy, acquired a dusty bluish tint, the color of moonlit fish scales. She did not utter a word. She became a mermaid, her fins in her slippers. She crunched across the wet, shattered glass, headed to the kitchen, poured water into a saucepan. She gathered the 4 small fish and the snail, searched for her cigarettes on the windowsill. Warm wind kissed her fingers, their webbing, the wedding ring. My fish will stay alive. And there's this painting behind me called by Alexei Rybika, Wire's Anticipation, and has this sort of scene of horror underneath this serenely floating seashells. So, kind of links in my mind. The next poem is called Narnia, and it mentions V, and I left that word unchanged, and I carried it over, because V is actually the name of a monstrous creature in a horror novella by a 19th century Ukrainian writer, Nikolai Gogol. Some people think of him as Russian writer because he wrote in the Russian language, but he actually was from Ukraine. Narnia. Today, let us go to sleep naked, like ordinary husband and wife, like lovers. Take off all the clothes, pants, cardigans, sweats, parkas, stuffed with passports, medicines, flash drives, cash, keys, credit cards, charges for the cell phones. Let us take off the shoes and the socks. Today, let us not fear that during the night a rocket will hit our house, but we will survive and have to run through the starlit winter darkness into Poland, into Narnia. Instead, let us declare this evening a festival of peaceful life. Strip naked, embrace and fall asleep without any care. Let our skin, our bodies remember trust, tenderness. This day, let us turn off the war for at least one night. Turn off explosions, shootings, bombings of Kharkiv. Let us draw a chalk circle round our bed to ward off demons, monsters. Let us turn on the floor heater tonight. Let us declare the war is over, at least for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours. Let us send a message to the evil sorcerer in his bunker. Have him hold off from killing today. Have him magically croak, at least for a day. Half a kingdom for a calm night. Half a lifetime for a peaceful day. Let it be like this. Crumpled sheets, 2 cigarettes in the dusk, 2 tiny orange-red fish in the aquarium. 4 hands, you pressing your ear to my chest like a lizard clinging to a warm mossy rock. And my voice, wine in a wineskin, as spring running through a cave. I say something tender, first banal, then true. And these words are formed not within the lungs, not in the throat, not by the teeth, but in the eyes, in the dusk and silence. Our blood pulses, flexible worms of subway trains, gliding along the echoing tunnels. The station I love you, next to last, in a not yet completed subway branch, in a not yet completed sentence. To get any further, beloved, we have to step out, and we need to continue on foot. So, thank you. All the credit belongs to the authors of the original. And I have a translator's note that I've attached to this poem because I wrote to the author asking him, well, you capitalize here but not there, and you know, punctuation and so on, because punctuation in English and Russian do not work exactly the same, so I needed to sort of understand why punctuation here and not there. And he wrote back and asked him if I could include part of his response as kind of translator's note. And he said yes, because it's so representative of, you know, these interactions I had. As for the punctuation and all the rest, I always give the translators carte blanche, maximum freedom of understanding and replanting of poetry. I don't barge into the process. Do what you think is best. Narnia was written in early March under shelling, and in a lull between bombings, I wrote it down the way it came to me, and then didn't correct anything in order to maintain the effect of authenticity, the gloomy, sick reality, when you can be killed at any moment or an hour later. And this goes on and on. We just got the electricity back on, so I answer promptly and quickly. So, yeah, so. Now I will read 2 poems by Anastasia Shakirova. She's a poet, prose writer, journalist, and artist. She was born and educated in Moscow, in Russia, but she has lived in Kiev since 2013. And this just illustrates that you know, as I said, I think my understanding is she married a Ukrainian man, and she lives in Ukraine, and she became Ukrainian. And she now writes poetry both in Russian and Ukrainian. One of the poems I will read in translation, she has both Russian and Ukrainian texts. And so I translated from Russian, but I made sure I understood the Ukrainian version as well. as I said, using help of Elia Lipis. And I also will tell you a couple of things in advance. The poem mentions various characters that are familiar to children, Russian sort of language, Russian literature from children who are brought up within that cultural space. They are very familiar. And some of them, like Scrooge, comes from Dickens, The Snow Queen comes from Hans Christian Andersen. But some characters you might not be familiar with, like Mora comes from Moomin Troll books. There's I think Finnish. And Kощей the Deathless is a Slavic sort of folklore character. But all these characters are sort of evil or dark or frightening in some way. And Knight with a Heart of Stone. But they all in some way are kind of somewhat vulnerable villains. So, and the other thing that she mentions, she has this line about being liberated against one's will. So one of the many conflicting and varied claims made by Putin's regime as to why they attacked their neighbor was that, they were there to liberate the Ukrainians from their supposedly evil Nazi government, supposedly. So that's why she has this. We were taught differently. Let go, forgive, do not fight. At least don't smack them right in the snout. Always offer, if not the other cheek, then at least a hand. Help them to their feet. Speak to them. Do not shout. You see, we were taught to remember, to understand the world is complicated, never just black and white. The origin stories of our make-believe villains deserve to be heard. Rough beginnings in youth, poignant memories shrouded in pain, set to music and oboe or flute, such gorgeous strains, grand and epic. A drama in 100,000 words. As bookish kids, we knew a different evil. We recall it well. Take Kощей the Deathless. That old sorcerer's downfall was his reckless love for Vasilisa, a wily girl. He hid his death in an egg, then was foolish enough to spill to his bride the secret of cracking the shell to undo the spell. How easy he was to kill. We know about pitiful Scrooge, obsessed with profit and price, about the Snow Queen crowned with frost in her palace of ice, how she let Kai go with Gerda and didn't give chase. Because after all, what good was that boy to her? He was bored with the toys she gave him and wouldn't stir to make her a cup of coffee or to prepare a supper. Even the Knight with a Heart of Stone once had a living heart. Even the horrid Mora craved the warmth of a friendly hearth. The monster merely sought a shelter under the bed. The lion was a playful cat. Those are fairy tales. Reality is not like that. Real evil knows no hesitation. Its face is blank. When it locks its eyes on a target, it does not blink. Whatever gets in the way is a mere obstacle, junk, even if it is living, especially if it is living. You know, a plague doesn't pause to discuss or explain. It has no interest in diplomacy or restraint. Real evil is mechanical. It makes a repetitive sound, the whine of a bullet, a rocket whistling down to crash in the huddled quiet of a peaceful town. Real evil is two-dimensional, like a sheet of paper, a rag. Yet a rag is just the thing to fashion into a flag. Later, this will be taught to grammar school pupils of Kharkiv, Bucha, Kherson, Borodyanka, and Mariupol. Evil is unmistakable, like rabies, flat like a bandage unrolled. This has been written down by our elders with their scratchy quills. If someone tells you that he'll liberate you against your will, that he means to bomb your cities and shoot to kill, believe what you've been told. And again, there's a piece of artwork here that I think resembles this. There's Lena Kurzel's small painting over in the corner there. It's called Crazy Faces of War, and it has this row of this mechanical-looking soldiers. And one more thing in terms of doing translations. You notice that sometimes I preface the translation with little notes where I explain characters or names of creatures or otherwise annotate the translation in some way. So having notes attached to a poem, it sort of changes the poem, makes it a little bit more academic looking, maybe gives a less immediate feeling. But on the other hand, I feel like, okay, this poem can be conveyed to somebody in English language, except there are just a couple of things that the person needs to know. And so then I attach them. Sometimes I do what's called stealth gloss, where I kind of build into the poem a little bit of explanation that's not quite there in the original because it's subliminal, like this Cachet the Deathless. I sort of explained a little bit the fairy tale. She just refers to the fairy tale in a couple of ways, but it's more assumed that the person knows about the egg and the spell and the girl and so on. So sometimes you can sort of sneak that in, but in some cases I attach it as notes, and in some cases I just hope that maybe the reader may not know what this is referring to, but that the poem's kind of logic, internal logic and energy will carry it across that gap. So it varies. So next poem is also by Anastasia Shakirova. And again, it mentions a couple of creatures from folklore. I think that Ukrainian literature, by the way, Gogol is a good example of that, is very rich in references to folklore, all kinds of magical creatures, kind of like Gogol was one of the early magical realists. So she mentions mavkas. These are specific to Ukrainian folklore, and these are female forest spirits. They were believed to be the spirits, the souls, the ghosts of young girls who died violent deaths or some sort of tragic, shocking deaths. And Mavka was assumed to look from the front as a beautiful young girl, but her back was hollow and you could see the bones, the skeleton inside. And Kikimora is a kind of general Slavic folklore creature. It's also a female, usually a house spirit, and usually malevolent, but it sort of was shown as very hard to see, little creature composed of something like twigs and shadows and something like that. So I left those words in the translation, Mavka and Kikimora, because there isn't really any English equivalent. So Frank and Arthur are probably nodding because they definitely remember working with
that's where I learned.
Shane. Yeah. We were working on this translation, so I'm grateful. So credit for the poetry itself belongs to Anastasia Shakirova, and a lot of credit for whatever work in translation belongs to Bruce and Shane and Arthur and Frank, and whatever doesn't work is mine. Okay. They said, of course we don't mean to hurt you, we wish you well, little girl, bright spring flower, sweet silver bell. Or else, why would we crouch here in the bloodthirsty thorn bushes' shade? On this winding path towards the darkest forest, this path overgrown with vines hiding sinkholes and skulls, treacherous in the wild. So tell us, warm flesh, tender human child, what brings you here all alone? She said, I've heard tales about the hoofprints of goats, the tracks left by grey wolves' paws. The rainwater that collects in these tracks makes your head grow horns, your hands grow claws, and you stop being human. I've heard about the curse that turns you into a swan. Too bad it's a swan, not a hawk. But all wings have uses, so I will go on. They said, your voice is too soft. Come near so we can hear you. Little sunbeam, cutie, foolish girl from the farm. What wild tale lured you here? Surely you'll come to harm in a thicket that harbors these evil curses and spells. No one who enters returns with a nice tale to tell, or comes back to tell any tale at all. Why throw away your life for nothing? Don't be in such haste. Baby, come near, and we'll make it all go clean and fast. We are ravenous, so you'll feed us. This way you will not go to waste. She said, I have heard of the trees that grow strangling roots and branches with teeth, and of fair-faced Navkas, their hollow bodies reeking of death, of the ghouls, the swamp sprites, the severed mare's head that either kills you or grants you wealth. My village is 2 miles from here. We know the forest tales well. All the little ones listened as the elders would tell and retell these tales. They are true. That's what matters. Nothing else is of any worth. These tales are why I'm here, why I mean to go forth. Even if I get gobbled, my ribs gnawed and scattered about. So much hate fills all my bones. Each tooth and each knuckle will sprout, rise out of the soil to blossom more bitter than wormwood, to sow dark seeds. Like sparks of the blackest flames, so fiery brambles will spread. Do you know what befell that village 2 miles from here? That village is dead. The elders, the babies, my mother, my father, all gone. Now I'm alone, like the severed mare's head, like a faceless kikimora woven of bristle and bone. Our land was invaded by foes. I still hear their generals' barking shouts. I see his chest bright with medals, his face a carrion eater's snout. My father yelled to me, run, Mariska, and I was always fast. I wish I became a mavka instead, drifting hollow and lost. Nothing more can be taken from me, the village is scattered stone. All I have left is my rage. Will the forest take me for its own? I do not care if it drowns me, turns me to ice, leaves me strangled and torn. If all that's left of me is just blood in the snow, a bright scarlet streak, I want to avenge. I want to protect the land, my own folk who are still alive, who are yet to be born. Will you let me through? Speak. She lifts her gaze. Such a fire is ablaze in her eyes that those who crouch in the shadows, startled, creep off to make way, stung by something akin to fear for the first time in their undead days. Each moment hangs heavy and silent. The dark forest broods. Then the trees step aside. The small human enters the woods. This is a good fairy tale, so sleep, my baby. Sleep, hush-a-bye. The barefoot witch who rules all the forest quietly passes by. Whoever plants arrows will reap a harvest of pointed steel. Whoever plants grief will taste wormwood and poison in their meal. The heat of wild burning grass will engulf their bed. This is no fairy tale, but what tale can I tell instead? Keep on living, and I'll go on living, sometimes crying, sometimes feeling strong. The witch roams the forest. She whispers and mumbles. Her voice holds a song. So this poem was, she also wrote this, a version of this poem in Ukrainian as well. But I can't pronounce Ukrainian correctly, so I won't try. So let me pause for a second and see if anybody has any questions, comments, I don't know. I'll have some water. Okay. There are no questions. I'll continue reading. So the next poet is also from Kharkiv. His name is Oleg Ladyzhinsky, and he's a poet. He's also a science fiction writer. He's also a high-ranking karate person. That's kind of a separate branch. But he's a science fiction writer, and he writes together with another author. He has a co-author, Dmitry Gromov, and together they formed. They sort of created this fictional writer whom they named Henry Lyon Oldie, which sounds very British, and they gave him, a fictional biography of a British writer. But in reality, it's a combination of various parts of their own names and patronymics and a made-up sort of character. But they do write real science fiction, and they won, for example, Eurocon 2006 International European Science Fiction and Fantasy Convention. They were declared the best. And by the way, you can buy poetry and science fiction books in electronic form. You can buy, they write in Russian and Ukrainian, but there are also English translations. I'm not sure who, I don't remember if they themselves, I think they had translators. So if anybody is interested, it's their website is oldie, oldie.world. And if you go there and go oldie.world and then /en for English /, you will see what's available there. And I bought stuff there. Well, I bought stuff there in Russian, but you can use PayPal and so on. And they have some of the books. They have sliding scale, and you can pay more, and then the money goes to help people of Ukraine. So the first poem uses a word Führer, which again I left in the English translation. It's a German word. It's the title that was used for Hitler, but now it became in Russian, as I think in English too, kind of a word for any kind of tyrannical sort of violent ruler. And the title I gave this whole reading, and nonetheless life is being reborn, comes from this poem. And nonetheless, life is being reborn. Yes, being reborn to live in mercy, in pity. Life is coming back. It's being reborn in love. It laughs while mocking the Führer's lies. It blooms on a crater's rim. It weeps while reading. He fell in battle. We will remember him. And nonetheless, life has no end. Yes, life does not have an end. Sacred and sinful, raging and carefree, hurting and on the mend, eternal and random, drunken and frail. Even the life that gets killed, that soaks deep down into the soil, the very last drop of it spilled. Even when a carrion stench is spread by a ruddy-faced thug, I still recall how a surging stream tears boulders out of the muck, how children play, how an acorn sprouts, even though the oak tree is gone, how nonetheless life does go on. Yes, it always does go on. And again, I saw a piece of artwork that I thought kind of resembled this poem. There's Ilya Yuravoy's, I don't know if it's painting or engraving, called Resurrection. And you see that there's a kind of human head that also looks like it's sprouting like a tree. And the next poem, I think, sort of shows perspective as a writer of science fiction. Start by showing them happy, contented. A prologue, 3 pages, not more. Ripples of sunlight on silky eyelashes, darting dragonflies over the shore. Then let rip. Iron rain, crashing thunder, pools of blood and the trees split asunder, long dark roads, mud and dust, mud and snow. No, start over. The scent of plum blossoms, a prologue, 3 pages to show how happy they are, how contented. And afterward, don't touch them, let go. And another poem I translated by Madison. When poets fall in battle, death destroys soldiers, not poets. Under the burning sky, there he lies, his bearded face is quiet. Poems are immortal, only soldiers die. When shrapnel pierces a musician's chest, it wounds a sergeant major. It's his fate that grieves me so. As for the concerto, the theme and variation are unscathed. Art is eternal. Music lifts and heals. Poems give voice to an undying soul. I wish I knew why all this does not help, why none of it can comfort me at all. Here's another poem, and this is where I did make changes to the form. Basically, I had to simplify, frankly, the form. I really wanted to transmit the content and the mood of this poem, and sort of its structure. It goes 4 lines, 3, 4 lines, 3, and so on. But in the original also rhymes, and I just used blank verse, no rhyme. And again, it reminds me of some of the artwork. There is 4 pieces. There are 3 knights and lady knight, and they sort of look like angelic figures. They look like protectors, but maybe guardian angels. The artwork is by Rostislav Luzhetsky. A raven black angel, a lily white angel. This one holds a sword, that one's trumpet shines bright. And then there appeared the strange, mottled angel. He lived here and there, he did this and that. He's far from perfection, hardworking but bumbling, no better than most who do everyday work. These herald messages, those prophesize numbers. And some, higher yet, know creation's first light. This angel was not made to shine clear and flawless. Look, all of his features are muddled and plain. Yet everyone knows whom to call when in trouble. The mottled wings open to cover your back. A blanket to warm you, a lullaby to soothe you. Hardworking but bumbling, his deeds are not great. You get what you get. There is no use complaining. He's simply not better than most who do work. The angel He's dozing. He feels sad. Swords and trumpets do not show up, no matter how you call. And now I will read you another poem from Kharkiv. His name is Andrei Kostinsky. He is a poet and a literary editor. And this poem also just appeared on 128lit.org, this translation. It's called Kharkiv. Oh, and it addresses somebody named Guillaume. Guillaume is Guillaume Apollinaire, a French poet who lived in the first half of I think late 19th, early 20th century. And Apollinaire has a poem that praises mornings and puts them above evenings, and sort of Kostinsky in his poem argues for that. Kharkiv. My city is like a patient on the operating table. The heart taken out of the chest, lying nearby. The heart is still beating. The line of the cardiogram, the roofs of the half-destroyed high-rises. That line is not yet flat. Those buildings not yet leveled. But its amplitude is ever lower and quieter. I have always loved to watch the sunset, the sun climbing down onto the houses and making its way beyond the horizon, smoothly gathering and tucking in its scarlet cloak. Now I hear the sun moaning when it feels the sharp fragments of buildings shattered by rockets and bombs. It even pulls away when it touches the ruins. Each day seems longer than usual by one church step. Guillaume, Guillaume, sunset is not more beautiful than sunrise, only because the sun that rises over my city will set weighed down with the sadness of all has seen. Guillaume, Guillaume, the sun nourishes life when it rises, but anticipates the sunrise with trepidation, knowing that the eastern skyline will meet it with a new arrhythmia. I recall seeing off a sunset with my friends on the roof of the boiler room of the tallest building in the city, and meeting the dawn with them after not having gone downstairs that night. Holding in my hand a wine glass I found in the boiler room, having drained it, raising it against the dawn, saying to the girlfriend of a snoozing friend when she compared the sky to the color of my eyes, "Look, now the wine glass will be filled with the pink wine of dawn. It should be drunk right away, while the nighttime chill is still on the lips." My city, my beloved city, hold on. Soon the doctors will come back. They will place the heart into the chest. The blood vessels of the subway will fill with rhythmically moving trains. The sun will smile once again at the sight of boulevards, well tended, in floods of greenery and flowers that will show it how to prolong its amble above you. And I'll conclude with a poem by Alexander Shchedrinsky from Odessa, Ukraine. And that poem really struck me by its incredible generosity of spirit. What's the nature of strife and of friendship? I wish to be certain to know. I wish that without hesitation I would mete out death to a foe. That I feel not one moment of pity for the scoundrels invading my soil when I gaze at these latter-day fascists coming here to destroy and despoil. Yet I think something different will happen. If amidst all the rubble and soot, pointing down at the spread-eagled stranger my fatherland orders me, shoot, I will topple, and the snow red with sunset will blend with hot tears on my skin. I will weep for the stranger as human, for the kinship that's closer than kin, As I stare at the root of destruction, I will let sorrow win in the end, and the heart will not know as it flutters. Who is there, a foe or a friend? Thank you. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Okay, well, thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that the poetry sort of gave another dimension to the artwork that we're seeing. I think that they're all part of as I said at the beginning, culture that's continuing to grow and continue to bloom and continue to develop despite I almost said worst attempts to destroy it.
I have a question about the artwork. So, is there a connection between the artwork and the poetry, or you made the connection?
I made the connection. I mean, I think that the connection is that these are people who live. I mean, I think that this artwork reflects, the situation, what it's like to live. And there's a lot of it is obviously has incredible sadness and incredible sorrow and darkness. Not because I think it's this.
And how did the artwork come to you?
I think John can tell a little bit more, but I think that there was a project that brought together Ukrainian artists. John, maybe you can. I know at the high level only what I read about.
Yeah, it really kind of. Well, I'm recording this, so I better get near a microphone, right? It really started with these three women right here. Olya Plozanyuk, Hanna Melichuk, and Halina Androzhenko. These two women are Ukrainian Americans. They came over in the 50s, and Olya still lives in Ukraine. They're friends. And when the invasion occurred, they were Zooming with each other, and they wanted to do something to focus on the culture and the art of Ukraine and bring it to this country. And so they got this idea that they would not look for the artists that are really established, but actually the ones that are emerging, the ones that are just beginning their careers as artists, and they would seek them out and they would try to get them to bring their artwork over here. And they literally went onto Instagram and they found the artists that were working in Ukraine at the time and asked them. And they got 200 pieces of work from 25 artists.
So what, mail or?
Well, that's the interesting story. Olya has relatives over in Ukraine, so she was going to go to Poland and then go over the border, and she was going to gather all this artwork up and bring it back. Well, when she got there, she actually found out that they had mailed it all already. They were so eager to have the work over here that it was all.
And I see that the works are for sale.
They are.
So
yes.
Does it benefit the artist? Or?
So half of it goes to the artist, and the other half goes to a charity that benefits the people of Ukraine. So it's it's quite amazing stuff. I think that one of the things that is the most remarkable to me is this painting right here, Protected 12. I can't talk about it without almost crying. What that is, and there's another one over there as well, what's going on, and Halya is part of this. They're going around and they're taking sandbags and they're surrounding the statues with the sandbags, and then they're wrapping wire around it, and then they're wrapping sheets around that so that they won't get just, hurt by shrapnel or bullets, I mean, if somebody dropped a bomb on it, that's not going to help. But we did see a film here last week where there were statues that were not protected like that, and they were in terrible shape. And I think what really moves me about this is that you're risking your life to go out. You could be doing something else to protect yourself, and instead you're protecting your culture. That's how much you value it. And I think that there's a lot of lessons to be learned there. There's a lot of lessons to be learned from everything here, including the indomitability of the human imagination, in spite of everything that might be going on in your world, that you still would make something, and you still would protect the things that your progenitors made, your history, your culture, and all of that. So you do get it, it just looks like a sheet over a statue, but it's so much more, So I'm sorry, that was a long answer. But.
No, thank you. Yeah, and I actually participate in the weekly, there's Marshall University in West Virginia, they have a weekly panel devoted to events in Ukraine. I participated a couple of times with poetry, but I also listened to them, to their recordings. And it's remarkable because they invite scientists and the work that went into saving scientific collections. For example, Museum of Natural History, they have unique collections of what's it called? Now I'm thinking in Russian, like animal and animals sample collected from all over the world, and how they are preserving it in the basements. And I think that there is. I think that this is a war where Russia's regime is really trying to destroy physical people, physical infrastructure of everyday life, but they really are very determined to erase the culture, because it's one of their claims is that there is no such thing as Ukrainian language, culture, and so on. That there's all some inferior versions of Russian Empire's culture, and the determination, like John said, that goes into keeping the existing culture alive and growing it and looking into the future is just immense. It's just really, in a way, I think that it is something that not only is protecting in some way all of us against aggression, but I think it's also showing so clearly the tremendous value of all kinds of cultural expression, be it science, be it poetry, be it visual arts. You see concerts in the subway in Kiev and so on. You see theater performances in bombed out spaces. It's just moving and heartbreaking at the same time, that kind of spirit and that kind of determination to survive not only physically, but in terms of like preserve the humanity. And some of these poems, they, like this last poem I read, there is this sense of not losing shared humanity, even with a foe, once that foe is brought low. So thank you for opportunity to speak about this. Thank you. Thank you.
What was so striking to me, and I think what communicated so well some of the experiences, was the universality of the blue water but
Yeah,
I
yellow
don't
and
know,
blue.
but blue
It's-
water and a golden sky, that's,
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
universal.
These are the colors of Ukraine. They're very peaceful and natural colors. So, yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much.
And I just wanted to thank all of you for coming out tonight. We really do appreciate it. It's really an important part of what we do here, to be able to bring people together to have conversations like this. So have a safe trip home, everybody, and thank you.
Thank you very much for coming.